Okay, well, it's 3 minutes after. I say we go ahead and jump into it. What do you think, Ethan?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, then let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to all of you for joining Novel's latest webinar in our series on growth. We're here today to talk about how to scale faster and spend smarter. And by that, we mean how to outsource your growth engine. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Keith Harrington, COO and co-founder here at Novel Capital. If you're not familiar with us, you probably should be. We're a non-dilutive funding platform, which is really just a fancy way of saying we provide debt capital to growing companies, B2B SaaS companies across the US. We do this every day. We've provided about $100 million of capital to a little over 150 companies across the country to date. And we are, like I said, doing this every day, continuing to fund. Um, with me today, I have Ethan Whitehill, who's the president of Crux. Crux is a partner of ours, and Crux offers outsourced CMO, that's Chief Marketing Officer services to its customers. And we will be launching a joint product soon as well that I won't tease it anymore here, but something that we're very excited about partnering with Crux on. I'll let Ethan go ahead and jump in and introduce himself and the company. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, a little bit about me. I've been in advertising, branding, and marketing for 30 years. Cough. Worked both client side and agency side, but spent most of my career building agencies. And the first firm I founded, I ran for 20 years before selling it into a roll-up, and we handled brands like Sprint, T-Mobile, Hallmark Cards, and LG Electronics. I was part of the leadership team for that combined agency when we sold in 2020. So a year later, I realized I was working for the agency that bought the agency that bought my agency. And I decided it was time to do something different. And that something different looked like fractional CMO consulting. That was my plan. But a former business partner and banker actually said, I got a better idea for you. And he introduced me to my now partner, Malia McRae, who was building a firm at the time that provides fractional CMOs at scale. So here I am. I should say that along that journey, I learned a thing or two about financing growth and working with capital partners. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that today.
That's great. Thank you, Ethan. One of the things that at Novel we're always excited about doing is providing the capital that a company needs to actually invest in their growth. And so I think this is going to be a really rich discussion on how to think about that as a CEO, how to make budget decisions, how to think about where to allocate your capital and your strategic resources, how CMOs can drive growth, potentially without having to pay full-time employee costs, what kind of capital to use to actually fund growth, and then maybe some case studies that Ethan can share about how they have seen customers of theirs grow using their services. So as always, we have a Q&A in the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just hit that Q&A button if you have any questions at all. Please don't be shy. Share your questions. Those are usually the most important and interesting parts of the conversation. I want to, and we'll make sure that we get those answered. But let's get started. Ethan, so let's just talk about kind of the bigger why to really launch here. Tell us, what is the why behind Crux? Why do you guys exist?
So the crux of our crux,
There
so
you
to
go.
speak. Yeah, and our why is really, really simple, actually. It's growth simplified. And that is our reason to be. The next question probably is the who behind the why. So we do this for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who need executive level marketing so they can launch, pivot, or scale. And we found that there's really a gap in the market. A lot of firms kind of at this stage, a lot of companies at this stage struggle because they can't quite afford a large agency. They also can't afford to build out a full marketing team. And, so we're here to fill that gap. And, if you look at the average comp of a CMO today, it's $193,000. And that's a lot of money, especially for a single FTE. And, a lot of firms will need that. A lot of growing companies need that. But they also need a full team to execute, which, if you add that to 193,000, that's another 250 on top of that, 250,000, which is really challenging. And that's where we come in. We provide a fractional CMO. and we surround that person with a team of marketing specialists for less than $150,000 a year. That's really the value proposition. And I call that marketing department as a service, and that's what we provide.
Everything is as a service these days.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about how it actually works. One of the things that a lot of the CEOs that we work with are always trying to figure out, how do I really configure that marketing and sales engine? So I'm really curious how you actually configure it. You put a fractional CMO in place, and then how do you evaluate what are the needs of that particular company so that you can align your resources with the vision of that CEO?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we found is at the end of the day, those CEOs, they need two things. They need clarity and they need results, period. And so our goal is to provide a clear plan, a clear way to execute the plan, and clear metrics to confirm that it's all working. And we follow a process that we gave probably the most obvious name to. It's plan, do, and improve. So first, we do our homework. We look under the hood of the business so we can fully understand the customers, the competitors, the competition, the opportunities within the category itself. And oftentimes that means we talk directly to our clients' customers to get the real truth of their business. I like to say we triangulate sort of how you see yourself today, how you want to see how you want to be seen, and how you're actually seen. And we figure out what that sort of true middle is. And we take those insights and we build a strategy. And we've learned from our clients that our own entrepreneurial experience, in kind of what we've seen in our own business, that annual plans aren't always practical. So while we want to build toward annual plans and annual goals, we found it's much better to actually execute in 30, 60, 90-day planning cycles. And so every 90 days, we're resetting a plan. And it's a little bit like playing 4 quarters of football, and that's our plan stage. So we develop that plan with an eye toward the future, but building out 90 days. And then we go to the do phase. And the do is really about working the plan, following a cadence of weekly meetings, monthly meetings, and we're leveraging all the capabilities that we have in our toolbox. So that specialty team that we surround our fractional CMOs with, it's everything from branding and content marketing to digital advertising to PR and all those things in between, everything else we can do. And it's not to say every client needs all the things, but we build sort of the plan and sort of the match the capabilities to the plan based on what they need. And so our model is nimble, and we call a lot of audibles during that 90-day cycle to adjust the plan and be, kind of be agile and move at the rhythm of that entrepreneur. And that brings us ultimately to the improve stage. And at that point, we measure everything and we make decisions based on analytics, because that's how our clients work, and we want to work that way as well, always optimizing based on data.
That's great. When you're talking to a CEO of an early stage business that's trying to grow, what are the most common questions that you're getting from them when they're trying to figure out, okay, should I hire a fractional CMO? Should I hire somebody who can outsource and take control of my growth engine and really help me move the needle here? What are the most common concerns that you hear from those CEOs? Most common questions?
Yeah, I think it's money first. How much is it going to cost?
Well, that's why we're here. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's once you do it, like, how do we know we're doing the right things?
Yeah.
And that's why, when we go into that research phase at the beginning, it's really important. And what we find is that really creates close collaboration with their team. They want to know how much do they need to be involved. And so it's almost as little or as much as they want to be, but the more we get of them, the better. We don't like to go away into a black box and do our research. We like to involve them in the process. And then the next question is, at what point can we take this over ourselves? What's the difference between a fractional CMO and a regular agency? What's the difference between a fractional CMO and an in-house team? And a little bit of what I talked about earlier, we kind of go into that difference, but I will say ultimately every business is going to be different. There's no one size fits all answer. So for most companies, once you have a plan and you've got maybe a fractional CMO in place to provide that strategic guidance, it never hurts to have a mid-level marketer in-house. So we find ourselves many times either kind of being that marketing team for our client or an extension of their team. And it all kind of depends on what they need. But, if they have somebody in-house, that person becomes an essential link for us. They don't have to be a traditional marketer per se. We just need that point of contact. And so we help them sort of identify how to structure their team and what those roles and responsibilities are so we can work well together. Yeah, I think that's a lot of what we hear in the beginning.
That's interesting that it doesn't necessarily, your point of contact doesn't necessarily have to be a marketing, subject matter expert. Typically, if they aren't sort of a trained marketer, somebody who's been in that world before, is it best to have somebody who's sort of aligned with talents around project management, or what are the kinds of
Yeah,
folks who
no,
are
yeah, great
usually, how do you set
question.
that up for success?
So I think number one, a project management would be good because I think they would do a lot of internal coordination, but also just I think some clear accountability because they're going to have to wrangle stakeholders that are probably more senior than them. So ideally, we're going to be working with the C-level executives within that organization as much as possible. And this person is going to help us do that. They're going to really help facilitate that from the inside out.
Okay, that's great. So companies have a journey, right? And one of the points in the journey is to decide, do I do this in-house, or do I bring in someone like Crux who can really help me grow this company? Um, does that decision, how long does that decision last? I assume that there's at some point a company grows to the point where they can mostly manage their own sales and marketing, and they sort of in-house and offboard you. But
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure that that's the case. I'm curious, how does that journey work for the companies that you work with?
Um, and I hate to say it depends again,
Oh,
but it
sure.
really it kind of depends on the category, the marketing budget, whether they're
Mhm.
B2B, B2C. There's different demands depending on the space that they're in. But I would say in general, under $10 million is a great place for a fractional CMO. I think we can really be that missing member of the team because again, as we talked about, it's a challenging resource to hire, and it's also an expensive one. But in general, too, 10 to $100 million, you may have a small team. So
Mhm.
that might look like 3 or 4 people at the most within your organization that are supporting marketing or have some combined marketing sales function like revenue operations.
Mhm.
And again, we'll come in and we'll typically in those kind of situations, we'll be the strategy and sort of specialty services for that company. So they'll need somebody to help them lay out the roadmap. And then a lot of times they're not going to have the capabilities to do all the things that they need to do, whether it's branding or PR and media or even video production, that type of thing. Once you hit $100 million, though, that's where you get the full teams. You might get 15
Yeah.
people or more in a marketing department. And you'd think maybe they wouldn't need fractional CMOs, but we still actually have clients in that space because if you think about the entrepreneurs that maybe have a business unit or a product line within that organization, they can't get the resources from the marketing team. They need additional capacity. And we're brought in to be that sort of additional capacity or even outside perspective. It's like, we've been too
Interesting.
close to this. We need a CMO to kind of take a new look at it.
Very interesting. Um, yeah, okay, that's great. So I'm curious, how do you talk to CEOs about, like you said, one of the first questions that they ask is, how much is this going to cost, right? And being an entrepreneur myself, I'm familiar with the thought process of, hey, we need to build a marketing team. And like any other team, marketing teams are expensive, and you have to figure out, like, where do I trade off? How do I think about this? How does that conversation go? Because it isn't cheap, right? I mean, let's just be straightforward and transparent about it. But it's a critical function that once you have product market fit, you really need to figure out how to really build your growth engine. So how do
Yeah.
you talk to CEOs about that? How does the conversation go around? How much does this cost, and how am I going to how can I actually fund this as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so we're very transparent about our fees, and kind of I think I indicated we're for most of our clients, and I'll tell you we have 50 or 60 clients at any given time, and they're spending around $150,000 annually with us for that service, and so
Which,
they
by the
know
way,
that
if
up
I could
front.
just interject,
Yeah.
$150,000 for a CMO and a team of marketers who's actually devising and executing strategy.
Correct. Thanks for clarifying that. So
That is
it's that full sort of fractional marketing team that they're getting.
right.
And we have to also let them know realistically, you can't do all the things. We have to be selective. So that comes back to that clarity and results. It's like, where can we win? And we have a conversation at the beginning. What does winning look like? And then who do we win with? So we think about all our partners and relationships and channels and customers. And then we get down to how do we win? And we get very selective. You're going to do a lot better investing in one channel and doing it really well than trying to do all the things and diluting yourself. And so we have a realistic conversation about that. It's interesting too, because a lot of our clients are either VC backed. Sometimes they're bootstrapped. Sometimes they're, they have debt capital behind them or other things. All of them have some accountability to that money though. And as that sort of missing C-suite member with the marketing voice, we find ourselves a lot of times presenting to their board and to their investors to explain use of funds, to provide the case for a marketing budget. And that case can be pretty mathematical. It's like you spend X, you get Y. And from the research and things that we do on the front end, we know really well sort of where they have gaps and where we can move the needle immediately. Very simply, I think of this equation: if you're going to grow, you have a share of voice need to grow, and that share of voice needs to exceed your share of market. And a lot of times it's by, a factor of 3. And so when we think about your investment, we kind of look at where you are today, what you want to achieve, and we can give you some ideas on what you might need to spend. And again, it's going to be different for every business.
Yeah. And it is going to be different for every business, but I suspect you've learned quite a few lessons along the way about which engagements are going to be successful, how, which companies you're actually going to be able to help. So when you're talking to a business, what are the signals that, I'm going to ask the inverse of the question, actually. What are the signals that you see where you just know, okay, this business isn't ready. This isn't going to go well. They have to mature more. What are the things that when you see it, you're just like, it's just not going to work just yet?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think part of it is the clarity on their product. That's something that's challenging for us to come in and solve. Like when we come in there and there's a product problem, that's something that we'll notice immediately, and we'll say, okay, there's more work to be done here because taking this to market is too soon. It's going to be too early. The other problem that we often see is a sales problem. So sometimes folks will come with us and they'll try to solve a lack of sales with marketing, and lead generation is a big part of the equation. But if they don't have a sales strategy, if they haven't built out their sales force or a way to actually engage prospects, that's also a problem. And so we'll identify that earlier. In fact, kind of as a side note, we saw that problem often enough. We actually developed a sister company called Crux Accelerate that does something very similar in the sales side and the sales area. So where we do fractional CMOs, think of it as fractional CSOs, where they're actually providing sales coaching and development for those companies. And a lot of times we'll bring them in as a partner when we see that situation.
That's really interesting, that the way you view it, which interesting aligns with my experience, I guess. So I guess it makes sense. But you have to have kind of that. You have to know how you're going to engage on the sales side before you can reasonably expect to do anything on the marketing side successfully. So okay, that's super helpful. Now, what are the things that you see where you're like, oh man, this company, we know we're going to be able to help this company right out of the gate? What are some of those signals?
Yeah, a lot of times it's positioning. So the way they talk about themselves, the way they position themselves in the market. Most of our clients, and I'm saying this just based on sort of the repetition in our work, but we do a lot of branding and messaging, and it's very foundational stuff. But we find that that's an early win. We can get in there, we can help them articulate their branding and their messaging, just so there's clarity for their customers. So there's not confusion about what they do, and they can be very specific in a way that differentiates them. So we actually take a lot of our clients through something we call the meaningful difference exercise. And one common mistake we see in the market is people are just messaging to table stakes, things that will maybe qualify you for a conversation, but it's not going to win the conversation.
Interesting.
And it's a lot of folks that will lead with features when they sell, not benefits. And it sounds very 101 when I say it, but we see it time and time again. So we take them through an exercise where we say, okay, let's identify what are all those kind of acceptance factors just to be at the table, just to earn the right to have the conversation with a prospect. And then from there, what are the performance factors? What are those things that you do better than, or maybe worse than somebody else? Because there's messaging that we need to consider within that too. So if you're just consistently outperforming in an area, that's a benefit, and that's something that we need to talk about, or an advantage that we need to talk about. And then last but not least, it's kind of like, it is that meaningful difference. So what are those things that you say that no one else can say or easily duplicate? And that's the magic we're looking for. So when we're working with our clients, it's finding that true differentiation that is a competitive advantage, because then we'll build the brand around that, because we know we can win in that area.
Well, that's super helpful. Thank you. It kind of made me chuckle when you said, there's things that you're very good at, and there's things maybe that you're sort of underperforming, not good at. I have to ask. So when you have conversations with your clients, and you obviously ask, like, what are the things that you're not as good at compared to your competitors? What do you do about that? Are you really messaging around that?
Yeah, so those are usually their areas, their weaknesses that
Mhm.
we identify, and a lot of times it might be operational, and it's not for us to solve necessarily, but we make that clear, and especially if that comes through research. This might be something we get through conversations with their customers, or sometimes we'll do larger surveys depending on how big their customer base is. And if we have a couple hundred customers telling us that this is a problem, that becomes a point of emphasis for them to work on. But we're not gonna message that. That's not going to be the area that we lean into typically.
Yeah, we're not so great at this, but we're pretty
Yeah.
darn good at this stuff over here. But don't worry about the stuff that we're not good at. Okay, this is why I'm not. This is why I'm not a marketer. I wouldn't be good at it. Just a reminder to everybody: feel free to drop any questions that you have for Ethan or for me into the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll make sure to get them answered. Let's move on to kind of the second topic, which is how do people pay for this stuff? You've noted that it's obviously going to cost money. I think I love how transparent you are. Look, this is how much it's going to cost. It's going to be about 150K a year, which, by the way, in my experience, is perfectly reasonable given how expensive, like you said, how expensive a CMO could be, that could be a $200,000 hire.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
add on other team members, it can become expensive very, very quickly. So when you're bootstrapped or you're venture backed, or anything, and you're just trying to be budget conscious and make sure that you're efficiently getting to market and acquiring customers as quickly as you can, this is you have to be very budget conscious. So when you're talking to customers, how do they generally pay for it? Are these profitable customers that you're dealing with? You said some of them are venture backed. They're obviously not going to be profitable, or most likely not going to be profitable. Are they raising capital? What kind of capital are they raising? I have my own point of view on this, which I'll share in a moment, but I'm curious in your experience.
Well, and this is why I'm so excited about partnering with you guys.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's a mix of things. It could be venture capital, could be an angel investor behind them. It could be bootstrap because they had a windfall from a great year and they've got money to invest and they're finally at that point.
Yep.
But it is sort of that life stage of a company where they realize, okay, to accelerate growth, we need to put some money into marketing. And usually they've already made a decision that they're either going to hire a role or build a team or go outside. And that's, again, going back to we're the in-house,
Mhm.
outsource kind of solution. We give them that Goldilocks in the middle, that usually they've made some decision that represents a budget that is realistic for us to work. So, they've identified that money, but when they don't, we can adjust, we can scale and we can kind of chunk out what we do. So there may be some critical things that they need to go to market. It may be a website. It may be, just sales collateral. It may be an email program, whatever it is. And we can work with them to sort of build that on a project basis as well. Now, the challenge is, and we will identify this early, is if you don't spend enough, you're just throwing your money away too. So there will be a threshold where, like, yeah, it's not even worth investing in that because you're not going to be able to support it once you launch it. And that's a conversation then about, okay, how do you get funding? How do you do this? We have a lot of banking relationships, and we've introduced clients to banks, but that's a long and uncertain road.
It's not
Uh,
going to go well.
yeah, and again, if you're to your point, if you're not profitable, if you're not there yet, if you're not in the green and putting money down on the bottom,
Right.
then banks aren't going to loan you. They're going to be very, very, very conservative, and that's why I think what we're talking about now with Novel is so exciting, because I just don't see anything in the market like this.
Yeah.
I think it's a real opportunity, especially for SaaS companies.
Yeah, and thanks for teeing that up so perfectly. And just so that everybody knows, we are now partnered. Um, our point of view on it is, look, if you're a technology company and you're trying to figure out, you've got product market fit, you could clearly see the growth opportunity, but you just don't have the capital to execute on it, to capitalize on it. That's really where our product works very, very well. This is where this is most of the capital that we provide to companies is specifically to help them fund their growth engine. Companies have gone through the difficult part of the journey where they figure out, here's how I sell. Here's what my customers want. Here's how I talk about it. And now I can understand, like, if I spend a dollar, I have an understanding of what I'm going to get out of the machine. But I can now build the machine in a much more robust way. And part of that is adding in a layer of marketing. And a lot of the companies that we work with are early in that part of the journey, or they struggle with trying to figure it out. Maybe they hire somebody for their marketing department. It doesn't go. It's the same thing that we see with sales, right? You hire your first sales VP, and unless you've done this a bunch of times, it's probably going to be a bad hire, right? And that person's not going to be the right person to help you grow. And there's going to be 6 months of struggle, and then you're going to have to go find a new salesperson that now you've learned a bunch of lessons. It's the same thing, I think, with marketing. You sort of have an understanding of what you're looking for, and then you hire somebody, and maybe it doesn't work out. So to us, having a professional third party parachute in and say, look, here's how we're going to help you grow is an excellent way to grow your business. So our point of view on it is we're going to fund that all day long. We love that. You've got a company, you've got a product, you've got the ability to grow, and you've got smart people helping you out. So, and that's the way that our partnership is working. And so one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting going forward is how are we going to be able to work together to provide the capital that those companies need so that they can grow with your help. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, what we see is when we provide capital to a company that is at the very early stage of figuring out their marketing engine, that's when we see those companies really start to take off. Because once they start to learn and then implement what they're learning very quickly in the marketing engine, then that's when you start to see those companies really start to grow. And that to us is super exciting. So that's why, and that's why I think our partnership is going to be so beneficial for your customers and for ours. There's just goodness everywhere. Everybody wins. Companies grow. You're helping customers. We're helping customers. That's what this is all about. I'm very excited about it. Anything you want to add on that is
Yeah,
totally
as you were
open to it.
talking, I was thinking a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people kind of watching today are familiar with the E-Myth and
Oh
how
yeah,
businesses start. It's, you're a technician when you start the business. You're really good at something, or you have a really good idea and you know how to execute it. And then you become a manager as your company grows, and you take on, more resources, and you have to manage more complex operations. And then ultimately, you got to be that entrepreneurial leader. You got to drive the business forward, and you need to work on bigger problems. You can't work on the small things. And
right.
I kind of feel like the fractional CMO model is a cheat code to that, because you can access that talent. You don't have to go through marketing has very similar stages to the E-Myth too, as people are building teams within their organizations. And you can actually go from 0 to 60 with a fractional CMO and nothing flat when you do it right. With not a lot of commitment too, because what we find is, especially if you're looking toward exit, and that's further down the road for a lot of folks. But if that's your thought, and that exit looks like venture capital or private equity or something like that, then having a fractional team is actually a very good thing.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the companies that you've helped. Maybe you've got a case study, or a couple of examples that we can just talk through how that story went, and
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Two examples actually,
Great.
funny enough, they're both platforms in the logistics and transportation space, but we helped them in very different ways. That's why I thought
Great.
they were interesting. The first one was a platform that connects fleets and drivers with essential services like payments, legal support, and compliance. So,
Mhm.
think about all the payments that you have to make as a commercial, over the road trucker. How do you manage all that efficiently? How is that reported for compliance? What kind of legal support do you get when you get a ticket? So this company solves that problem with their platform. And they needed to improve their lead quality and maximize the ad performance because they were doing some digital ads, largely leveraging search and other platforms. But it just wasn't effective. So going back to our plan to improve approach, for the plan piece, we analyzed their audience, we looked at their competitors, we looked at the market, and then we built a very targeted paid search and media strategy. I think they were approaching it maybe with not all the right information, and they hadn't calibrated their campaigns right. So we were able to come in, do the whole thing, kind of look at their company, in the way we do through our research process. And then really identify the opportunities from a messaging and even like an opportunity perspective in targeting. On the do side, then we built a campaign with creative, that actually spoke to the right audience, and then we leveraged those channels to attract high intent leads. And so we were executing the campaign at a very high level. And on the improved side, we had real-time analytics sort of informing that and allowing us to optimize as we go. So we're big fans of test and learn and fail forward fast. There's no shame in putting a campaign out there that doesn't work as long as you immediately respond and correct it and then learn from it. And so the results really spoke for themselves when we were done. They saw a 62% increase in their monthly sales as a result of just that optimized ad targeting and the new messaging and creative. They got a 10-to-1 return on that ad spend. So, that's good money you would always spend again. And then a 72% growth in revenue from those paid ads. So they really took off. And this platform happened to be within a kind of a larger organization as well that had other folks doing similar things in other spaces. And they saw that example, and that sort of led to us engaging with other business units and products. So just a really interesting example, but that was what I would call sort of the do it for me example.
Yeah. That's great. You said they're both sort of in the transportation and logistics sector, and I just have to ask, are they both in Kansas City?
Yes, they happen to.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a density of those
Yeah.
kinds of companies, those kinds of technology companies in Kansas City.
Yeah, and one of my former clients from a past life was Yellow Freight too, so I had a little
Yes.
background in that space.
Yes. That was a very large freight and logistics company here in Kansas City. Okay, that's great. So share your other
Yeah, so
example, and
the
let's
so the
compare and
other
contrast a
example
little bit.
I would call the do it with me example versus the do it for me. And this one, this group had a marketing team in place, but they knew they were too close to where they were, and they needed more strategic firepower. And so they looked to us rather than sort of doing the whole thing soup to nuts. They engaged us specifically for the strategic front end of their marketing program. So this particular client is a last mile platform that
Mhm.
matches companies with big and bulky deliveries. So think about furniture orders that require white glove service. So if you're ordering furniture online, somebody brings it to your living room. These guys are the folks who actually make that happen. And they do it through an app, which makes it very streamlined. And the app speaks to both those delivery companies, those providers, as well as kind of the shippers on the brand side. And the industry is getting really crowded in this space. And so they needed to perfect their brand position, just make it crystal clear. They needed a
Mhm.
stronger value proposition and a marketing framework to bring it all together. And so on the plan phase for us, we were really focused on building that strategic foundation, and that meant defining their brand pillars. They had a lot of messages, but there really wasn't an organization to them. So we kind of brought those together to four things that whenever we talked about the business, it laddered up to those four things. And that gave them a starting point for all the rest of the marketing that they would do. And they also differentiated them with clearly distinct messaging versus the rest of the industry. Going back to what I was talking about, meaningful difference, we were finding their meaningful difference. And then we built a strategic messaging framework kind of to blow that out. And that ultimately shaped their sales strategy, their marketing approach, and they were putting a new website out there that they were developing in-house, but we were able to sort of advise on sort of the architecture, the information architecture, and sort of the messaging that went on that website. So again, that was a smaller engagement. And to give you, again, spirit of transparency on budgets,
Sure.
this was probably in the range of $35,000 to $40,000 versus $150,000. But it put the gas in the tank they needed to drive the car, right? It gave them what they needed to really take off and do that. And so their team was equipped with a stronger narrative. They had this kind of improved value proposition and positioning for their platform. And we moved them from just this platform provider to a trusted logistics partner in the marketplace. And the results on that, again, this is totally shared credit with their team because we were doing it together, but triple-digit year-over-year growth is what they saw as a result of that. And they were just able to not only attract new customers with it, but attract new delivery partners and other folks that would be using the platform with them.
I love that. The thing that I think is really striking is the systematic and sort of framework-driven approach that sort of brings expertise, runs it through a framework, and then you're able to deliver results. And I think that's what separates what you guys do from a lot of the other folks that I've seen and talked to in the market around outsourced marketing. And so I think as you're talking about that, I'm sort of imagining the framework in my head, and we at Novel, we're very much about frameworks and process. So it makes sense to me, and I understand why growth happens when you're combining frameworks for experimentation and leaning into what's working. Were there any lessons that came out of either one of those engagements that would be good to share with CEOs?
And this kind of builds on what you were saying. What we find a lot of times when we come into these situations, companies, it's not because they're not trying. A lot of times they've tried. And going back to my football analogy, the problem is they're playing soccer and they're not playing football. They're not playing for the end of the game in the fourth quarter, right, and being strategic necessarily play after play. They're chasing the opportunity, they're chasing the ball, and that tends to take them off their mission, so to speak, or the thing that really makes them special in the marketplace.
Right.
And so we bring that discipline. That's one of our jobs, is a little bit to play bad cop as a marketer and say, nope, this is the thing. Let's stay on target, stay on objective. Most CEOs really appreciate that because they understand that they have to do that. We work really well, and I don't know how many folks that listen to this do EOS, entrepreneurial operating system.
Yes, yeah.
But what we find is the way we works really well with EOS companies. Like if you
Interesting,
understand
okay.
EOS and sort of the structure that brings to your organization in terms of planning and tackling major initiatives and other things, that's what we're after. If we can be the EOS of marketing, that would be fantastic.
That's a great comparison. And for anybody who is not familiar with that, that's is it the entrepreneurial operating system? Is that right?
Yep.
I haven't read it in a while, but there were a couple of books that kind of gave great frameworks for managing your business and setting up objectives. I would strongly recommend it. It's a great way to think about your business. No more questions. So I'm going to, Ethan, anything you want to share? We can go ahead and wrap up here. But anything else that you want to share before we do?
No, I just, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I think this was it was wonderful to get together and, just again, to promote our partnership. I'm very much looking forward to kind of bringing our offering to folks that you're working with and vice versa, because, outside of money. I know marketing and sales are top on people's lists when they're trying to grow, and I think together we can really achieve that.
Yeah, and to be really specific about that, one of the things that we jointly are working on and starting to provide is when a company needs an outsourced CMO and an outsourced marketing team, when they see how much it's going to cost, if they need capital to pay for it, that's where we're here, and we're going to provide discounts to those companies so that it's a little bit easier for them to get the capital that they need in order to execute their plan and grow their business. That's why we're here. That's why we love this partnership with you and Crux, and we think that's going to help a lot of businesses grow. Um, Ethan, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing a little bit about yourself and about Crux and about the success that you guys have had. Um, I think we do have another question. Oh, we've actually last question was how can businesses determine I will jump back in with this one question. How can businesses determine the right time to outsource their growth engine versus building it in-house? I think we talked a little bit about that before, but let's give a little bit of detailed advice there if you could.
Yeah, and I think it's as we talked about earlier, it kind of depends on the situation, but I think if you are in growth mode and you're not thinking about marketing and you don't have the expertise in-house, you should be thinking about it. So I don't think there's necessarily a wrong time to start. I think the sooner the better, especially if you want growth, because the right fractional CMO as a marketing partner is going to help you lay that roadmap for the future. And there's small ways to do it and there's bigger ways to do it. I think building an in-house proposition is, as I said earlier, I think it can be very expensive to do it right in the beginning. So this is why we exist. This is why we believe in the fractional CMO model. Rather than putting all your dollars, if you're able to allocate budget to one single FTE that might be a marketing leader within your organization, it's better to have that strategic mind, but also give them the firepower with all the specialty services to execute the plans, because it's not really helpful if you have a plan and nowhere to take it or no way to execute it.
There you go. Good advice. That makes sense. Okay. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. I had started to close it down. That was awkward. Sorry about that. We'll close it down now. Ethan, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your experience. Sophie, maybe we can pop open the slide with contact information so that if anybody wants to get in touch with either of us, they can. You can always see me on LinkedIn, or you can email directly at keith@novelcapital.com. Ethan, I know everybody can find you on LinkedIn. How do they get in touch with you directly?
Yeah, so just ethan@cruxkc.com.
Okay, well, it's easy enough. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining, and we'll go ahead and sign off.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.